Will you lose your lunch if you have to watch one more reality dating show? Is your blogs gone wild, videos scratched from overuse? Then it's time to turn that dial to something a little more dangerous. Time for some real action. It's time to blow it up!
You know, that pretty much describes this game in a nutshell. I could honestly end the video right now. Alright, the little time thing down below says I need to talk more, so... Alright then. Hello and welcome back, and today we are finally ending the Ratchet & Clank Marathon. But anyway, Ratchet & Clank had a pretty solid trilogy of games under their belt in the PS2 days, with many great things about them such as the weapons, the planets, and of course, the arenas, which as you guys may know, are one of my favorite elements of the series. Well, in 2005, Insomniac would go and create an entire game based around this concept, Ratchet Deadlocked. A little bit more low-key innuendo, but an innuendo nonetheless. Now, while I enjoyed the arenas, can you really make a full game based off of this one concept alone? Well, for the sake of ending this marathon, let's find out. Now today I'm going to be looking at the PS2 version because it's the one I own, and the PS3 version... I have some things to say about that one. Strap yourselves in, boys and girls, this is going to take a while. See, Deadlocked wasn't part of the Ratchet & Clank trilogy for PS3. Instead, it was released later as a digital title on PSN. Here's the thing. Remember how I said in Ratchet 1 that the digital versions of the trilogy had more bugs? Now think about that with a game that was released digital only. Now I know what you're thinking. Oh, come on, WiiDude, you're overreacting. It can't be that bad.
We'll see.
Is it safe to come out?
Rest assured, you are now far beyond the reach of hope.
Nope. Never mind, the shark is right. All hope is lost. I mean, how? How did that go under the radar? And it's not only that, there are graphical issues all over the place, especially in the cutscenes. And in said cutscenes, they stutter. Constantly. Like, seriously, look at this example and tell me that's not jarring to look at. So, yeah, I think it's safe to say you want to see the footage from this version. Unless you know you like seeing nightmare material. And because I'm looking at the PS2 version, I'm not covering any of the online functionalities, as the servers are no longer active, and the PS3 version doesn't have many people online today. So it's not really important to go over. But that's not to say multiplayer will be entirely cut from this review. More on that later. I am so glad this is the last time I have to talk about these HD ports for this series, I tell ya. Unless, you know, they make an HD port for the future series and then I have to talk about it again and make my life harder, but anyway, let's end this thing. So sometime after the third game, Ratchet, Clank, and Big Al are seen on the Starship Phoenix. Meanwhile, Sasha informs them that several heroes have either gone missing or have been killed on an underground game show called Dreadzone, run by a business shark named Gleeman Vox. By the way, genius choice of animal, I'm just saying. Her transmission is cut short, and that's the last time we ever see her. Take that as you will. The three are captured and Ratchet's forced to now compete in Dreadzone against his own will, after getting Ratchet's suit all fixed up, for the most part.
Me out of this thing, you blarg-headed frack monkey! I can barely breathe and my tail feels like it's shoved right up my—
Oh my. Ratchet clears the training course and receives a message from Vox that states Dreadzone is in a place unreachable and undetectable from outside forces, so there's no chance of Ratchet getting outside help. And to make sure he plays by Vox's rules, there's a collar around Ratchet that will violently shock him if he goes out of bounds, and more importantly, if he doesn't cooperate or if Vox has just had enough of him, the collar can be detonated at any time. So now Ratchet will need to fight his way through the ranks of Dreadzone, defeat the exterminators, and gain freedom for himself and all the other heroes trapped here. Yeah, that's a bit darker than normal for the Ratchet series. And true, it does have a more mature tone, but there's plenty of comedy to even things out, and most importantly, it stays true to what a Ratchet game is. I can't tell you the amount of times where I've seen a series go so overboard with a dark plot that it loses its identity and it just becomes painful to watch. Thankfully, everything here is still in line with the series and it never goes off the rails. Now as for the story, I really like it, and I find it miles better than Up Your Arsenals. I always like these Gladiator stories, and for Ratchet & Clank, it works better than I thought it would. And the fact that you are given clear objectives by your ranking and taking down the exterminators, you have a sense of progression that's apparent and welcomed, and I always wanted to see what happened next. My only real problems with the story come from two things. One, while the main exterminator Ace Hardlight, a former hero gone psychopathic killer, gets some development, the other exterminators don't really get much build-up or backstory before their fights. Well, Reactor apparently was a math teacher that became a murder bot, which I find hilarious, but Shell Shock, from all I know, is just an Arnold Schwarzenegger-like robot, and Eviscerator I know nothing about, and he just pops up for a boss fight, which is kind of disappointing. And two, what I think to be the bigger problem, is it me, or did Ratchet feel a little off in this game? At the beginning of the game, he seems fine being captured as long as he gets to blow stuff up, and honestly, he's kind of back to being a jerk like Ratchet 1, which isn't necessarily a good thing. He acts like this for a while, and then in the middle of a cutscene, he just suddenly is against all of it, when he was supporting it just a few seconds ago in the same scene. That change just felt a little too quick. That's all. So continuing with the dark theme from the story, the levels were also given a darker edge to them, with a much more dystopian feel to each of the environments. That combined with a more rock-heavy techno soundtrack do bring out a sense of solitude and lone soldier feel to the game that I think creates an identity that makes it very distinguishable from the past 3 games. In a good way. Especially the soundtrack. There are some songs that just really pump you up for a fight, and I like that. Graphically, it still looks great for the PS2. Animations look much better and really embrace a cartoony feel that works great with the characters. One animation in particular that I always enjoyed was Ratchet's helmet opening and closing. I don't know why, this always just struck me as cool looking. And then there's the part where I think the presentation really shines. The writing. Deadlocked, despite its darker tone, might be the most humorous game of the marathon for me. The jokes are flying all the time in both the cutscenes and gameplay, and for the most part, they hit. Mainly thanks to Vox, who I'll talk about more later, and then of course, Dallas and Juanita. The two commentators of Dreadzone, and they're great. Dallas keeps trying to hit on Juanita, with her being violent, putting it lightly. But the two have such a great chemistry with their jokes, and you get to reap all the benefits from it. And the fact that they keep trying to make Ratchet's public image worse and worse by telling ridiculous news stories is something I can't help but find funny. Selling these jokes is also the voice acting, which is still fantastic, and it feels like everybody is just having a blast recording, which is always a good sign. So Ratchet Deadlocked is on the same level of polish as the previous games. But now we have the big dividing factor between this and the main trilogy, the gameplay. Gameplay of Deadlocked is actually a pretty big change for the Ratchet series. I mean, you still go to planets and you blow up everything in your path, but that's really about it for the similarities. For one thing you'll notice right away, the game now has a proper difficulty select, where you can change the difficulty whenever you load a file. It's recommended for your first run of a file that you play on one of the 2 easier difficulties, because those higher starred ones are definitely more meant for an upgraded Ratchet. And without those upgrades, you're gonna be a sitting duck. Or Lombax. Each planet is now broken up into different missions that you will need to complete in order to open up the next course, with some of them having a few extra missions outside the main quest to complete as well. And the fight system is just as good as it was in Ratchet 3, with a few new bells and whistles. For one, the level cap of your weapons has now been increased. Before, their max level was 8 in New Game Plus. Now it's 10 on the first run, getting a bit more powerful each time, until your weapon completely changes at level 10. And what's the max level? 99. 99! Remember how in the first game you could only upgrade your weapon one time? This is how far we've come, people, and yeah, having a maxed out arsenal fills me with joy I can't even describe. But in the leveling, there's a whole nother system added to your weapons: modding. There are alpha mods and omega mods. Alpha mods can help control smaller aspects of the weapon, like extra ammo, knockback, experience, or money gained from the weapon by using it, opening them up with each level. And then omega mods, which are added to the weapon when they reach level 10. These add more prominent effects to a weapon, with only one being allowed at a time. These include stuff like shock and acid mods, but then there's also one that can create a bunch of tiny balls, and then they all blow up. The bouncer shall never die! The weapon selection is much smaller, with only 10 total weapons, but for the most part, they're really good. You got great ones like the dual vipers, arbiter, mini turret, the shield launcher, which is much better than the hollow shield from last time, and my personal favorite, the mine launcher, which creates a small ball full of explosives that track anything down near it and packs a big punch. I guess I just have a thing for weapons that shoot balls. I scripted that and just said that in a video. Hold on 1 minute, I just need to... Alright, and I'm back. Nothing weird at all in this video anymore. Let's keep going forward. And then your Rhino equivalent, the Harbinger, which quite literally rains death from above. Now, as you probably noticed, Clank isn't joining you in many of the battles this time. Instead, he's your navigator to guide Ratchet in different arena matches and to hack systems remotely. Instead, you have two combat bots that Al found for you, Green and Merc. And trust me, these guys got your back.
Don't worry, boss. You won't end up like that last guy.
I hope not. I still have nightmares about it.
Oh, suck it up, Green.
They will provide extra firepower for you and be able to set off various contraptions, such as dynamite, EMPs, or even spinning a node for you. And at any time you can bring them back to Al, who will upgrade them with a new look or new weapons to help you out. But if you don't feel like teaming up with the computers, you can team up with a buddy next to you. For the first time in Ratchet history, you're able to play the entire main campaign in co-op. And Player 2 can even have their own separate mods for the weapons from Player 1. The only downside is that you'll lose your combat bots. For some missions, you'll also get various vehicles, such as the Landstalker, Dropship, Boomba, and a combat speeder in a jungle level. Just keep rubbing in those parallels, why don't ya? And in the missions, they can work a lot like Ratchet 3 in terms of the different stipulations, such as weapon switching randomly, sleeping gas, or platforming challenges. But there are some new ones like racing, defending a zone making sure no enemies get into it, speeding up the game every time you kill something. It can get kind of nuts. Completing the challenges will earn you both stars and dread points. The amount of stars you get are determined by your difficulty, and will unlock costumes in the extra menu. Admittingly, they're still not that great, but at least it's something you get along the way, and not something you have to look for like the titanium bolts from last time. In fact, there actually are no big bolts in this game, which took me by surprise, honestly. Player 2 can also get a Jack skin from Jak and Daxter 1 if you have a save file for it. But why Jak 1? You'd think it would be 2 or 3 considering the darker tone and all of that? Once you gain enough dread points, you can participate in a title match against one of the exterminators, and work your way up the ladder until you can take down Vox himself. And that about does it for Ratchet Deadlocked. So what elements did I like in this little battle dome? Deadlocked is another game I was wondering how my opinion would change on it after looking back at it. Thankfully, a lot of what I loved about the game still stays intact, and I even found some more things that I enjoy about it. For one, I found the plot to be pretty fun and enjoyable to follow. I don't think there's much in terms of character development or anything like that, but the entire atmosphere centered around the commercialism of Dreadzone, with them constantly mocking you all the time, it just gives you motivation to keep going and put an end to it all. And a good thing too, because this is easily the most action-packed Ratchet game out of all the 4 I've covered for this marathon, and it feels great. In fact, out of the games I've done for the marathon, Deadlocked easily has the best combat system. You don't know the pure joy that comes from blowing everything up until you've played this game. And the fact that your weapons can become as powerful as they can, along with the weapon mods, make that feeling last even longer. Plus, the game has a ton of replay value thanks to both the co-op and difficulty select. And trust me, Exterminator difficulty is not kidding around. And speaking of combat, let's talk about your combat bots, Green and Merc. When I got to having them on my team, I was a little worried at first. After all, computer AI in the previous games, let's just say they didn't help. Like, at all. But within the first planet alone, they proved to be more useful than your entire team in Up Your Arsenal. In fact, when the game was first revealed, they had to point out in particular how useful the combat bots were compared to the Galactic Rangers. So I feel like I wasn't the only person who had a problem with that. They can already handle enemies on their own, but with Big Al's upgrades, you can equip them to do even more damage and to have different types of guns to help you out. You can recall them to your side at any time. When they build up enough power, they can unleash a laser attack that does a ton of damage, but they also can help you in gadgets. They can set up grind rails for you, throw an EMP to take out an enemy shield, hack nodes for you, set up dynamite, and even spin screws for you. And while doing this, the other robot can create a shield for the other. And while they're focused on that, you can focus on the fighting, giving you so much more freedom than the other games. So safe to say, these two guys run circles around the Galactic Rangers, and I'm happy to say I enjoy having these two around. Plus, I love both of these guys as characters. Green being terrified all the time but still has your back, and Merc, he just gets me.
Let me at him! Let me at him! I'll tear him apart!
And with Clank actually helping you remotely and Big Al constantly upgrading the bots, every one of the characters that helps you out actually feels like they're part of a team. So when something happens to them, it works so much better than Ratchet 3 where they did nothing. It's not really moving or anything, but it's more effective for sure. And speaking of improvements from Ratchet 3, I think the level design has also gotten a much needed upgrade. While they still have a narrow design to most of them, I don't think it's nearly as bad as the last game. Most of the arenas are wide enough to where you can complete objectives in any order you wish, or they just give you more room to do what you want. And for what this game is going for, I think it works just fine. Even with the similar arenas of stuff like the Battle Dome, they keep changing it up to where I'm never bored. Speaking of the Battle Dome, this is where the Exterminators come in, basically your boss fights for this game. And guys, it feels so good to finally say these guys feel like actual boss fights. In 2 and 3, I always felt that the bosses were severely lacking. That's not the case this time. They feel much more climactic than the bosses in the past, and you actually need to learn their attacks in order to fight them, each having their own strategies. I don't think any of them get to the level of Drek, but I always do look forward to the bosses in this game. And another thing I really got a kick out of with this game, Gleeman Vox. I love this guy as a villain. He's a completely corrupt businessman that frankly only cares about selling his products more than anything else. And he keeps trying to shove products down people's throats that they don't want, rather than actually giving them what they want. Especially in today's world, I can't help but find that funny. But not only is he very comical, this guy works great as an actual villain as well. I mean, his entire empire is centered around a show where people get killed for views, and he's willing to blow up entire planets and even endanger his staff just for ratings. And unlike last time, everything that's threatening about him is shown and not just told. That collar alone gives him a sense of threat and power that Nefarious just didn't have last time. So if it wasn't obvious, he's easily one of my favorite villains in the series. Really, him and Drek kind of switch back and forth for the top spot. Basically depends on what day of the week you ask me. I guess Businessman just worked really well for Ratchet villains. Going back to the co-op mode, I love having this in the game. It can lead to a lot of fun times, and it's a good way to introduce people into the Ratchet series. But sadly, the last entry for this marathon isn't perfect by any means. Deadlocked doesn't do everything right, trust me, there's a lot it gets wrong. For one, easily the repetition. Sure, it's fun to blow stuff up, but a lot of the extra missions just all start to blend together, and it basically becomes kill all the enemies. Though to be fair, I still think they're better than the war zones because they actually change their locations up for one. But a big part of the repetition is that you're seriously fighting the same 9 enemies the entire game. And considering the game is nothing but combat, this gets boring fast. There also tends to be a lot of enemies on screen at once, and while it's fun to blow them up, it's not when the frame rate starts to go down dramatically. This is the only Ratchet game of the entire marathon to do this, and it's super distracting. I mean, in missions like this, it can be fun to break the game, but everywhere else, it's just not pretty to look at. And in the HD port, the frame rate is even worse, especially in the co-op. Just another reason to get the PS2 version, that's all I'm saying. Another thing that got on my nerves in different missions was Dallas himself. Now, while he does say some funny things when he's given context for the mission, his lines in the middle of the action that are supposed to be generic lines are placed everywhere and repeated so many times, to the point where it honestly started to annoy me. He's like that one kid that makes a funny joke the first time, but then he won't shut up about the same joke for an entire week.
Shut up, Dallas, you're not that funny.
In the extra missions, you will also sometimes have to use vehicles. And man, they are not fun to control. The only one I don't mind is the Landstalker, but stuff like the Pumbaa and the speeder bike, ugh. While I don't mind the level design, other than a few planets here and there, almost every planet starts to blend together, mainly because you can't really explore or find anything because of the mission-based setup. And to be fair, this is considered a spin-off, but there's no reason to look around the arena for stuff. Finally, one part of the control that still confuses me to this day, the platforming. The trilogy were all based with platforming mechanics in mind, so I thought Ratchet handled just fine when doing so. But here, platforming can be Ratchet's worst nightmare. See, Ratchet doesn't get that much height off of his jumps in this game, which really starts to hurt him when you need to start doing these tight jumps without Clank to help you at all. Platforming sections are easily my least favorite part of the game because the control doesn't feel optimized for how Ratchet moves in this game at all, and it ends up making me have to restart missions multiple times because of it. I felt it only weakened the experience rather than enhance it. So Deadlocked did change a lot of things, some for the better, some for the worse, but not being a typical Ratchet game, can I recommend it to you guys? Yes. Ratchet Deadlocked is an experiment, but I think a very successful one, testing out new ideas while making the entire game cohesive and still relating to what the franchise is all about. I love the humor, I enjoyed the story, decimating everything in my path is pure unbridled joy, and the multiple difficulties make this a game I keep going back to a lot. Though with the repetitiveness and control issues, it keeps it from topping something like Going Commando for me. But I think it's on the same level, if not a little above the first game for me. It's a little on the short side, but it's a fun time from beginning to end. And if you're interested, it's definitely worth checking out. The Ratchet Marathon is finally over. This has been a long trip to this point. To put things in perspective, for me, this marathon has started back in January. That was like 8 months ago. Yeah. And with how long these videos have been getting, just imagine what the future series is gonna be like. Okay, let's be real. Just imagine how long this video is gonna be. I think you can see why I'm not tackling all the games at once. So I think I'm just gonna call it a marathon for now, but don't worry. I'll be back to Ratchet & Clank someday, going through size matters all the way up to cracking time for the next marathon and then covering the rest. Which might be a lot considering how fast Ratchet games tend to come out. But to wrap things up with the 4 games that were in this marathon, Ratchet & Clank is a very solid first game in the series that holds up well, and I can still easily recommend it, even after the remake. Going Commando is without a doubt the best Ratchet & Clank game for the PS2. And I might be showing my hand a little early, but screw it. It's easily my favorite game in the franchise, and it's exactly how I expect a sequel to be handled. Up Your Arsenal was an ambitious game that, while it didn't hit everything right for me, is still a fun time and comes recommended. And Deadlocked is a perfect kickback and relax game where you get to blow up everything in sight, is incredibly addicting, and is a nice change of pace. And that's the thing about Ratchet & Clank, all the mainline games in the series are really good and are definitely worth checking out. And hey, if you want to try Ratchet & Clank after seeing this marathon, have at it. It's a great time. Now, I think I'm gonna take a well-deserved nap after this marathon, so I'll see you guys later. That's right, I need to do the end card thingy. Let me just wrap this up fast. Hello, Ratchet videos are on the left, other videos are on the right. If you want to follow me, go on Facebook and Twitter, do all that stuff right now. By the way, thank you Shy Ranger, Soul Ninja, Star, and Arcana for being my top rangers. Thank you guys for awesome. Thank you everyone. Have a great night. Bye!